G'day, this is Stephen Matchett from Campus Morning Mail with Expert Opinion. We ask people who know what's going on in higher education, what's going on. And today, for our inaugural edition, I'm asking Uncle Calderon. He's the principal advisor at RMIT. And I'm asking him what's happening with the brand new QS university rankings, which I think are out this morning, and to expand on his analysis that also appeared in CMM this morning. Uncle, I should add, as far as I know, you consult to QS?
Yes, I'm part of the QS, to the board, to the QS rankings.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for joining us for what did I say today? The inaugural Expert Opinion, the first of what I hope is very many, and very many that Uncle is on. Rankings. Love them or loathe them, everybody watches them. And QS is one of the big three. So big that the UK government last week announced that graduates of universities with a high QS ranking in the top World 50, they would qualify on that basis for a new elite person visa to get into the UK and live there. So today, Achel will walk us through the new results. And I want to ask him also what they mean and whether indeed we should take them and ratings in general seriously. So, Uncle, let's begin. Anything new in this year's numbers?
Well, yes, there are some new things, but I think reinforces one key message, and that is the reputation for Australian universities as measured by surveys is declining. It has been denting for the past 3 years, and now we see perhaps something that we ought to be taken more seriously. And when I mean taken more seriously, it's about, do we need to have our universities suffering from the reputation, or whether we're just too obsessed about our own reputation? So it's about the things about what universities want to get out of the rankings. And I think the rankings, as you say quite rightly, mean so many things to different people. But I think rankings have a purpose in that it could help institutions to navigate how they are perceived and what are their strengths and weaknesses and different things. And of course, the problem with rankings is it reduces so many things into single things. So, at times we all need to take the rankings with a grain of salt, but somehow they always tell us something about that things we don't like about the rankings or things we don't like about our performance. So it is a way to start basically creating debate, but also it's a way to start eliciting ways or roadmaps for institutions to improve and to navigate the perceptions that exist out there.
And there isn't a ranking in the world that some university marketer can't find something good in to talk about their institution. So looking at this year's top 50 or so, top 100 or so, it's pretty much as usual. There's bits of movement up and down, but nothing dramatic. It seems that, I think you've written before, that it's very hard to crack the top 100, but when you're there, it's pretty hard to fall out of it. Is that roughly right? I mean,
I think that's sort of trends, but it also highlights the other thing too, and that is size of revenue and the perception that is there matter to institutions. Basically, if you have a strength in research, you are pretty much likely to be doing well. And this is one thing we have observed with Australian universities, is that Australian universities have increased their capacity to undertake research over the past few years. And that's pretty much why we see that our Australian universities do well across all ranking schemas. But also we have fewer universities in this system compared to other national systems. So of course we had that additional power from that perspective. And of course we sell our education globally. So Australia is out there from that perspective. So, we're in terms of publications and research activity and outputs, we seem to be trending up in top 10 in the world, which is not too bad for a country that has only developed higher education since pretty much the 1960s, and to be massified or grossly expanded since the 1990s. It's a great success for Australia.
So the crunch that everyone feared would come with the pandemic hasn't come, at least not yet.
No, and I don't think it will come as severe as many people have thought about that. Probably, we have things, areas with strengths and weaknesses, but if we are able to navigate the terrain and address some of the things that we need to do, and it's not that we need to address the things that are fit for purpose or fit for the rankings, but it is about the things that matter for the institution. It's the institution mission should drive what the public or the stakeholder or the taxpayer view universities. So if universities are addressing their strategic mission and fulfilling that mission and vision, then we had nothing to fear. And of course, we all want to have resources and so forth. But it's just a combination of things that really matter as to how universities are perceived out there.
So any movement of note in the top couple of hundred?
Not really. I mean, perhaps the movement, like institution like RMIT moves back again into the top 200 after being out of the top 200 for a few years. So this key point from this perspective, and I think we have seen that from universities from other countries, is that you can fall off the rankings, drop off in the standing in the rankings, but you can climb back again. But it takes some years. And it's not that you want to have a strategy that is deliberate to go up in the rankings, but you let your strategic plan or your mission to do the talk and walk from that perspective. So I think that is from that perspective there. Now, QS is introducing some changes next year, which will be worth having a bit of quick look. One is QS introducing the graduate employability and a graduate employability metric, which comprises
again, what metric?
A graduate employability indicator.
Graduate employability.
Yeah, which is coming out from the metric from the ranking they already use, which is the graduate employment graduate employability rankings. So that's one, and now I suspect that is one that's going to be debated because it has two components. To basically look at the graduate employment rate, as well as a metric of the alumni, or the perception of alumni when they have received awards or that public recognition. So that can be a bit of sort of dodgy measure if you want to see it, because this is not a standardized way to capture all the activity that alumni are doing. It's drawn from lists that QS has been publishing. So that is one component. The other component is a metric which is related to research activity, and that is International Network Index. And what that metric does is looks at whether an institution is collaborating with other institutions across different geographies. So it is about to which extent an institution is diversifying geographically its networks of collaboration. So I like that metric, and QS has used this metric in the regional rankings. It started with Latin American ranking a few years ago, and then it expanded to other regional rankings. So it is not good to see that this metric now being taken to the World University edition from next year. And we'll see interesting to see what happens. And the other thing that would be interesting about this metric or the research collaboration index is that it could listen more to the extent to which institutions from different geographies are collaborating with countries that perhaps need to develop their research capabilities and capacity. So in some ways, it could also be a way for developed countries or countries from high-income economies to contribute to the development of higher education institutions in low to middle-income economies, and to some extent address the sustainable development goals. So, maybe it's a long shot in the things, but it's a positive way forward.
That's the similar idea. I think it's the Times Higher who've now got a metric based on the UN sustainability goals.
Yes.
Same approach.
Oh, well, same approach, but it's a different metric. So QS has been trialing that one in the regional rankings, and I like that one because it really measures to which extent countries are diversifying in the research activity. So that is a positive development. And of course, there will be people who will basically objecting to the introduction of these metrics because potentially it could alter to some extent the standing of some universities. But QS is known for one thing, from my perspective, or from analyzing the data over many years, is it doesn't suffer from volatility that we have seen in the academic ranking of world universities. And so we'll be interested to see what will happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So I would expect some volatility, but not a significant level of volatility that will go and put our arms up in despair.
Is that due to the difference in the methodology, where the ARW, you can get a massive swing year on year because somebody wins a Fields Prize?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that one, but also about the highly cited research, where basically pretty much you can go and buy highly cited researchers and then you move your way up. Right. And that distorts so much the stability of the ranking. I don't think QS will be aiming to do something like that that will cause severe things. So it will be interesting to see what happens. So I would suspect some volatility, but not a much volatility by the introduction of those two metrics.
Make a case for a ranking that is in fact based to an extent on perception, as a great deal of QS is, what, 40% on survey? 40% on survey?
40% on the academic reputation survey and 10% the employer reputation survey.
Yeah.
But, you know, like in reputation surveys, we all hate this. I would say, because we don't like how others perceive us. It's like, you know, opinion polls, like also disputed. But even the student feedback, you know, our academics and our leaders hate these student surveys because we always think that our teaching of the quality of institutions is far better than others perceive. So, you know, we have that sort of thing. But it is a matter of the perception that I often say that we need to address.
Well, yeah, and perception, and it is reasonably consistent. Australian entrants in the top 100 on QS are pretty much like the top 100 on anybody else.
Yes, and this is one thing I have always been telling people about when we talk about the reputation surveys from QS. They have shown some level of stability year after year. And probably that is because they have been normalized by country. So you can see the movement there, but they also mitigate to which extent people are voting for so many, for a specific institution and so forth, and for a discipline and so forth. So the data is normalized. And so you are able to sort of see changes over time. And that level of the way the survey is happening from QS, which differs to the way Times Higher Education do the surveys, is important because QS has a wider number of people responding to the surveys compared to Times Higher Education, which in some ways is pretty much asking researchers to provide an opinion of an institution. What I understand right now is that the various ranking companies are looking more closely at ways in which they can improve the data gathering, the questions being asked about that sort of level of perception, and distinguishing, making more clear about what question being asked in relation to the quality of research or teaching activity and institution. So I suspect that in the next few years, we'll see more adjustments to that methodology and probably refinement to the way the questions being asked.
Okay. Looking at this year's rankings, well, in the last couple of QS, annual QS surveys, there have been 2 or 3 institutions that have been making a strong push up the lists. Is that continuing this year?
Yes, but probably to a less extent, because I think, I mean, for Australian universities, I think the biggest problem that we're facing right now, in terms of the reputation survey, in terms of QS, is the perception that is out there about our universities. And I'm wondering whether the fact that we closed the borders for 2 years, or the idea of Fortress Australia, might have dented the perception that people have about our universities. So probably we need to do some work in relation to this. And I'm not suggesting, you know, we need to be doing more nice brushes, something like that, but taking more sizzling and reflecting what is how people perceive our universities, both domestically and internationally. And probably now that the borders reopen again, we are likely to see a slight shift, but I do not expect that the standing of the Australian universities as measured through the reputation surveys will jump anytime soon. So I think we'll have some work to do and some patches to fix. Probably in the long term will be benefiting. But I think the way the Australian universities have been improving in QS has been basically on one measure, and that is citations per faculty. Yeah. What that has meant, by contrast, or by the opposite, is that our student to staff ratio is increasing or is worsening. So obviously we have worked out that we are better off getting us better scores in citations per faculty than in student staff ratio. But I suspect that the pandemic also forced institutions to shift more to transition or remote learning and teaching and so forth. So I suspect that we are not going to see any improvement in the faculty to student staff ratio for many years.
We may see something on that when the new government gets around to releasing the quilt ratings.
Which I think will be coming out next week. So will be interesting to see what kind of discussion it emerges out of that with the results. And particularly last year, what we observed with the student experience survey was that Victorian institutions suffer quite a lot. That the perception of the overall quality of education experience in Victoria, and some, particularly in the states or in areas where the institutions or the cities were in lockdown or the regions were in lockdown, pretty much the scores went down. Yeah. So it will be interesting to see when the data is released next week, whether there's an uplift and to what extent that will help institutions to start mapping their way for the future years.
You're quite right on that. There's one particular Melbourne-based university which just had a terrible score in last year's quilt for internationals. It was just diabolical. Not yours, but one not far away.
Yes. We'll see what happens. We'll see. I think the issue around the perception with students about how the university, the quality of teaching, the education experience has changed so much over the past few years, and probably is going to change even more as institutions continue to transform their educational practices. The idea of lifelong learning, the idea about online versus physical activities and the hybrid ways of working. So I will imagine there's going to be a bit of adjustment that we're likely to see over the next few years in relation to how students perceive the overall quality of their educational experience.
So rankings as much a marketing research tool as a marketing promotion tool.
Yes.
That was a question.
Yes. No, I gather that was the case. I think, as I've always been saying, and particularly with some of these rankings, you can use them as a way of mapping a development or identifying areas of weakness, but you need to go beyond the data. You go behind the data, behind what is the metric, and understanding what are the factors and the causes that make something not go the way they are. The funny thing is with rankings is that the institutions used to do economic studies or impact studies over many years, and we seem to have left all of that behind, and now we just have embraced rankings like this is not tomorrow. So I have always basically say rankings is just one tool, and probably we don't need rankings. We didn't need rankings 20 years ago, but now it seems to be that the key driver for measuring performance. Right. So in the past we used to do more benchmarking, comparison studies, qualitative studies, and then do the sort of stuff that will enable us to understand how we were positioned and in which ways universities were fulfilling societal needs and the government's needs as well. So, but now we seem to be just using the rankings. So I think it's more to just using rankings.
I think they're probably a good deal cheaper than having to do it yourself. What are we going to do? How are we going how is the country going to present itself to new markets? I mean, there's talk of the potential of Indonesia and perennially India. How do you use rankings to try and assert yourself in markets where you're not really widely known or necessarily valued?
I think Australia is pretty much well known globally in terms of the fact that Australia has been selling international education for many years. It's almost like we have been treating international education as the same way as we have been exporting minerals in this country or resources, right? So India is a big market, but we also have other markets that perhaps will not give us the number and the size of the people coming from those countries, India, China, and so forth. But we have countries like Latin America, which, so many, and we only need to take a bit of the share of the people who go to the United States or Spain to come to Australia, and bingo, will be increasing. And that is the thing we have observed with Latin American students, is that once one of them starts coming in here, the other people will start following. And we have been expanding trade relations with Latin American countries over the past 20 years. So this is an example. There are other markets in other countries, in other regions, which could potentially be doing. Probably Africa is too far away in the sense that we have not built the networks and the trade flows over many years. But you know what? The future lies or the population lies in Africa. So, in the long term, probably we need to be looking, countries that are in Africa, and particularly the key markets in there. So there's a fair bit of work that potentially we'll be doing. And the international strategy that was released last November, in some ways, that was not really a strategy, more about a sort of collection of points that were put together and saying, we call it strategy in the roadmap in here. But and I do remember saying, we could be overcome other countries that are doing far better than us in terms of attracting international students if we get our mechanics, our processes, and our strategies right. And we just simply don't try to make the resources away from other countries. So we need to sort of use that as leverage to foster and improve trade relations, social, cultural relations with so many countries. So education is a good vehicle to promote better relations across countries, in not just trade.
Okay. I think we're getting close to having to wrap, but one last question for you. A university that went backwards this year and has maybe gone backwards for the last 2 or 3. What's your message in terms of what that means to them on a ranking like QS?
I think a ranking like QS, and I always say to people, the fact that you drop 1 year or even 2 is not a cause for concern or big worry, because you had to let your strategy do the talk and the work over the many years. So over the years, we always see that institution goes up, goes down, and so forth. But at the end of the day, once you look at the causes and the factors that cause the institution to go down, then you can address them and find ways in which you can mitigate that decline. But you do not need to be obsessed by the rankings. I think that's the key message to me. And the other thing is, if you have a good sort of parameters about the way your strategy, your mission, institution mission is doing, then over the long term, you will get up again. And not not everyone is interested in QS ranking. Some institutions might place emphasis on other ranking schemas, or even the teaching impact ranking, or even the QS graduate employability ranking. So, there are different ways in which an institution can address that kind of perception as measured by global rankings.
You could argue that in some institutions, they almost outsource their identity.
Yes, you could say that. But at the same time, I think the problem that we see, I have been arguing on this for a while about Australian university, is we just pretty much homogenize. What you find here in Melbourne is pretty much what you find in Sydney, and it's pretty much what you find in regional Australia. So there's not much differentiation in universities. And often people say, oh, we need to merge institutions. I don't think we need to merge institutions. It's the opposite. We need to establish and create more institutions, and probably make institutions smaller size. If the institutions will be smaller, probably our students will be a lot happier, because they will be having more opportunity to interact with peers, with teachers, and probably have a more enriching university experience.
We'll get you back to talk about that. That's a really, really important point. But for today, I know you got a lot on this afternoon, so I'll let you go. Thank you very much for doing this. It's the first expert opinion for CMM, and I think it's a great way to start the series. Ladies and gentlemen out there, thank you very much for listening and watching, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks. Cheers.
Everybody, bye-bye for now.